So, how does it feel when you play Roll Up to Win with Tim Hortons? Buy a hot or cold beverage using the Tim's app and find out. Roll in the app for a chance to win prizes ranging from free coffee and donuts to a Universal Orlando resort vacation or a sweet car. Oh, don't forget the TV. And this year, every roll is a shot at a $1,000 daily giveaway drawing for two $500 prizes. Roll up to win and get treated by Tim's. No purchase necessary. Account registration required. 50 U.S. and D.C. 18 plus entered by 4/2/23. See rules at rolluptowin.com for free entry and full details. Void in Florida and where prohibited.
The following is brought to you by the Social Suplex Podcast Network.
G'day world, this is the Sniper of the Skies, Robbie Eagles, and you are listening to Keeping It Strong Style.
Yo, this is Rich Latta from One Nation Radio. This is brought to you by the Social Suplex Podcast Network. We present to you the Ace of Podcasts, Keeping It Strong Style. Let's go. It's the Ace of Podcasts, Keeping It Strong Style. Covering New Japan, they ready to hold it down. Jeremy Donovan and the young boy Josh. Come and hit a job out in Barrio the Frost. From the Tokyo Dome over to the G1. Social Suplex is the network where we can get it done. I'ma chill and let them have it, cause this is just an intro. Keeping the strong style, 6 stars from the get-go, boy. Yeah, from Tampa Bay to the Tokyo Dome, this is Keeping It Strong Style with your hosts, Jeremy Donovan and the young boy Joshua Smith. And thank you for listening.
Welcome to Keeping It Strong Style, the ace of podcasts on the Social Suplex Podcast Network. The young boy Joshua Smith here, doing a special audio solo episode reviewing Tamashii Nights 3 and Nights 4. One of these days, we will get Jeremy Donovan on one of these shows. Please support our show by subscribing and following the Social Suplex Podcast Network or Keeping It Strong Style on the podcast app of your choice and leaving a rating and review. You can also get all the podcasts over at socialsuplex.com. Check out our Pro Wrestling Tees store, prowrestlingtees.com/socialsuplex. That's where you can get your official Keeping It Strong Style t-shirt. If you enjoyed this podcast, please consider making a one-time or monthly donation by visiting socialsuplex.com/donate and clicking on the donate button under the Keeping It Strong Style logo. This week's episode is brought to you by NJPW EXT, the only browser extension for NJPWworld.com. Frequently updated with features like dark mode, improved translations and layouts, custom and shared playlists, synchronized viewing parties, and much, much more. It takes NJPW World to the next level. Visit njpwext.us today for details. And we've mentioned this a few times on the show. This is not my first go around as it pertains to covering the world of New Japan's Oceanic brand, Tamashii. And earlier in February, they did 2 nights of action, February 3rd and February 4th. But it took about a month before that video was made accessible to us on njpwworld.com. And the time that it did become available was just chock full in the middle of a ton of other events and things that were going on that were like much more pertinent at the time. That kind of precluded us from being able to cover these events at that time. And it is kind of unfortunate if you really think about it, because this is like a new brand that New Japan is trying to build a little bit of, space for and some interest. And it seems like every single time this is only the second time they've done tapings, but both times it took a really long time before that videotape was accessible to the wider, NJPW World viewing audience. So I think that does draw back a little bit on fan interest and hype and everything like that. But I made it a goal. I wanted to make sure that we kind of carved out a little bit of time for these shows. And, this coming week, we have Karen Peterson coming on the show. Be sure to check that out. We're going to be doing a review of the road to Sakura Genesis, as well as previewing Sakura Genesis. And it just didn't feel right to have 2 full-length shows like they did back in February for Tamashii and kind of just talk about them for 5 to 10 minutes and move on. I wanted to give a little bit of spotlight to what they're doing here. Jeremy did want to be on this show. He had every intention, and schedules just didn't line up. So it doesn't look like that was going to be in the cards for us this time. I think he might be a little bit in the headspace of one Don Callis. He thinks he's only going to show up for the big shows, if you know what I'm saying. But we will get him on here one of these days. But we're going to go ahead and talk about both these shows, what I thought. The first night kicks off Tamashii Night 3, February 3rd, 2023 from Sydney, Australia. And this emanated from Selena's Entertainment Center, which is, according to my research, essentially a live concert venue, one of the more famous ones in Australia. And I don't know what the official attendance was for the show. We didn't get those numbers, but I will say this sounded and looked to be like a smaller crowd. And if you hear any paper rustling in the background, that's going to be my notes. I did take copious amount of notes for this. But they did about 350 plus for the second night. And this seemed to be slightly smaller for that. So I'm going to guess somewhere between 200 to 300 individuals were probably present for this show. And just my overall thoughts to kind of start things off. Again, 1 month delay to air these shows is probably a bit too long. I did think the production value was good for what was essentially an indie house show. Like they had LED boards and dark lights and multicam, and it was definitely a notch above what Tamashii Night 1 had basically given to us. But in terms of comparing it to Tamashii Night 2, it was a step below, which if you listen to my previous solo episode covering Tamashii, I remarked how the second night of Tamashii a few months back, or actually last year, believe it or not, had some of the best quality of just production when you're kind of comparing it to other independent level type shows. This kind of fell somewhere in between there, and it's going to be similar for Night 2 and Night 3, which was something that was nice. The production levels were comparable between Night 3 and Night 4 here. The venue was a good venue. I don't know if there was a way to configure it to basically sit more individuals. It kind of reminded me of, if you've ever watched like some of the famous Evolve shows here from like Ybor and Tampa, the Orpheum kind of has a similar structure and layout, and I always felt like they never were able to maximize the venue there either. So, but one thing they could have done potentially, they did have a large stage that the wrestlers were coming out on. Potentially, if they had put some seating up there, I don't know if that would have been a move that they could have potentially, made. But again, the commentary team on this first night was different from Night 4. I think that I didn't capture the names, and I swear to God, I tried so hard to figure out who these individuals were. They did say their names on the production, but I couldn't understand them. And when I tried to, I do know that they're the official commentary team for PWA Black Label, which seems to be the company in Australia that's primarily partnering with New Japan to put on these shows. And when I looked at their like rosters and personnel, I just could not find enough information to figure out who this commentary team was. They were good. I think they were the same voices that returned from the first couple Tamashii events. So that's a good thing. The crowd on this night, not the best. Between Night 3 and Night 4, this was definitely the weaker of the two crowds, because not only was it less people, but they seemed to be much more apathetic to just the ongoings. I don't know if there was disinterest because of the talent that was involved. Obviously, there's a mix here of some New Japan domestic stars, but primarily most of the card was, filled with either dojo talent from the New Zealand dojo or PWA talent and various other Australia indie talent. And yeah, I don't know what the deal was. This crowd was pretty apathetic, and it did, even though I thought that the show from a quality standpoint was pretty good, I do think that the crowd's lack of interest and response did hurt things slightly. One other thing that was interesting, there was quite a few domestic stars, and we'll give you the rundown here in a moment, but there was only 2 matches featuring domestic New Japan stars. Like I mentioned, most of the talent here was New Zealand dojo and PWA Black Label talent. And interestingly enough, again, they went with the similar structure to the first 2 shows, where none of the matches went over 15 minutes. Top top to bottom, and I'll give you the review here in a second, but I didn't think this was particularly a strong or great show. Even though most of the matches were shorter than 15 minutes, they were all given a good amount of time for the most part. And that actually left me feeling like the show wasn't extremely dynamic. Everything was like around the 10 to 14 minute mark. So the pace was a little bit arduous just watching it. I did think the second half of the show was much better than the first half of the show. And the biggest problem, I think, overall was the inconsequential nature of these two nights. If you're a completist, I'd say definitely check this show out. But if you're looking for great matches, you're not going to see anything that blows you away on this evening. So let's just jump into it. The show opened up, first match of the night, Jessica Troy versus Charlie Evans. This is historic because it's the first all-female match, or even match featuring females, for the NJPW Tamashii brand. Jessica Troy and Charlie Evans, I'm not extremely knowledgeable about either of these two talents, but based on what the commentary was providing us, they are training partners. I think Jessica Troy is one of the more senior wrestlers on the brand for PWA and is internationally traveled and worked for like the Shimmer brand. These two have a long-standing rivalry in the country. This match went 5 minutes, 47 seconds. And I did think that this was pretty good. The crowd didn't seem to be as into it as I was. I thought it was better than their reactions would indicate. But they did have a good match. I did think that it was a little bit slow. It had sort of like an exhibition-y sort of vibe, which, you know, kind of makes sense. There wasn't a lot of story leading into this. It was just sort of like a female match offering. But these two wrestlers, Jessica Troy and Charlie Evans, very familiar with one another. I thought they had a good pace, good style. And ultimately it ended when Troy caught Evans in a sub reversal. So she was going for like an arm bar. I think she's the arm collector. And Charlie Evans was trying to reverse that submission, and she got caught in a pinning predicament. 1, 2, 3, 5 minutes, 47 seconds. Jessica Troy wins. I believe they showed a sign of respect to one another, and we move on. Second match of the night was Nikolai Anton Bell and Jordan Allen Wright taking on the Velocities. And the Velocities picked up the win here, 10 minutes and 41 seconds. This was a match between New Zealand Dojo Boys in Anton Bell and Allen Wright. We've seen both of these two individuals on the previous Tamashii shows. And the Velocities are probably one of the most well-known Australian tag teams, even just internationally. I did think Jordan Allen Wright continued to be physically impressive in the style of work that he did here. He did seem to slow down in the second half of the night and showed up the second night with lots of tape on his ribs. And I'm wondering if maybe there was some sort of, potential injury that took place in this match. It's hard to tell. But the Velocities in their previous Tamashii showing, they were in a 6-man. We didn't get to see some of their best stuff. In this match, we got to see a bit more of what they have to offer, and this is probably the best offering best showing that they've had for the Tamashii brand. Although I've seen them have much better matches with more experienced individuals. Keep in mind, this is veterans versus rookies, which continues to be a long-standing theme all throughout these shows. I did think Nikolai Anton Bell seemed to be much improved. The Dojo Boys here looked very competent and not necessarily out of place. The story of the match was for the Dojo guys, youth, size, and power, because they were much bigger. And that seems to also be something that I'm noticing, is a lot of the New Zealand Dojo guys are pretty big. There's a lot of size there. You hear the commentating team mention how there's so many lions that are huge and they're wondering what's in the water. And I think that makes a lot of sense, just kind of considering that it's Fale's dojo. And when you look at the prototypical wrestlers coming out of, say, Shibata's camp, they all kind of emulate him in certain respects. Well, I think a lot of these guys are putting on size and power and are being recruited just being big, because that makes sense. They're coming from Fale's dojo. But on the side of Velocities, this is a team that has a lot of speed, athleticism, and experience. And the only part of this match that I didn't necessarily love was when the Young Lions cut off the velocities and they started to get heat. Their heat segment was a little bit slow and lacking. They seemed to kind of lose where they were in the match and what they should be doing next. So they're thinking a bit more than they're actually wrestling, from what I could tell. But down the stretch, there was a blind tag to a double stomp finisher, and then a shooting star press from Paris de Silva down the end. There was a weird top rope botch from the other Velocity going down the stretch where he was trying to keep one of the Lions from being able to break up the pinfall, and he got caught up in the ropes, and it was a little bit weird. But all in all, I thought this was a very good match, and I'd probably go about 3.25. I'm about 3 stars for the first match of the night. After that, we saw a singles match where Jake Taylor of the New Zealand Dojo took on Carter Dreams. We've seen both of these individuals on previous Tamashii shows as well, making their return here. And this was another instance where you see a larger New Zealand Dojo guy taking on someone with basically experience. And Carter Dreams is very much a swaggy sort of heel. And he picked up the win here, 9 minutes, 58 seconds. Early goings, the size and power of Jake Taylor was kind of the story here. So Carter Dreams had to find a way to kind of neutralize that, went after the left arm to slow him down. And the match itself was pretty slow until about the halfway part. They go into a big strike battle, seem to pick things up. We start to see more fire and spirit from both wrestlers. Decent arm selling from Jake Taylor. But the match concluded when we got double boots and splash from Carter Dreams to Jake Taylor. And as he kicks out, he locks in a Kimura into some sort of scissor combination to finish off that Kimura hold. And from there, Jake Taylor tapped out. We get a clean win at 9 minutes, 58 seconds. And for that match, I'd go about 2.75. Fourth match of the night, so we're at the halfway point. We see the team of The Nation, which was Mick Moretti and let me get the guy's name here, Adam Hoffman, which the Nations, and I think they've also gone by the name in the past, Four Nations, or maybe that's their current name. It's hard to tell. They're one of the more well-known and kind of reviled factions in Australian wrestling. There's been a lot of members, so I'm guessing, I don't know too much about them, but similar in size and scope to maybe say like TMDK. But based on what they were saying on the commentary, seemed like they might even have more of a prolific standing in Australia. They took on the New Zealand Dojo team of Richard Mulu and Victor Langas. The Nation team picked up the win at 11 minutes, 26 seconds. And Mulu is a New Zealand Dojo guy. Langas is a freelance wrestler, and he's under what's called the Green Dingo system. So he's also a rookie. He's only been wrestling about a year. And I'm guessing based on what they were explaining, the Green Dingo system is comparable to like the Noge Young Lions dojo system. So they wear green, they're green clad, and they're essentially young lions, but they're called dingoes because it's Australia. The Nations, again, they're pretty much stationed in the PWA promotion. The crowd was really, really hot for Richard Mulu. And this is a guy that was not only on the previous Tamashii shows, but was also highlighted and featured pretty extensively on that New Zealand Dojo reality TV show that aired on New Japan World. If you haven't seen it, I highly recommend it. I thought it was very good. And he was one of the standout guys there. I do think that there's probably a case where Richard Mulu, because he is local, is bringing in friends and family to these shows, and that might be upping the perception of his overness. However, I don't want to discount the fact that he does seem to have a lot, even if he's green in the ring, he has a lot of charisma. And I think that goes a long way. Plus, being native New Zealand, I think that also kind of endears him to the crowd. And he's a big guy, so he sort of has something. They haven't figured out what that is just yet, but I definitely think that there's upside with Richard Mulu. I was a little bit confused because I haven't seen Mick Moretti too much. I saw him on the previous tour when he faced off in a singles match, main event against Ishimori. But I've always seen him wearing clown makeup, and I thought that was sort of his gimmick. And he came into this match kind of clean without any clown makeup. So I don't know if that's only in singles matches, or, I'm not sure what the deal is there. Someone that's more knowledgeable about Australian wrestling could probably clue me in. But I thought that the vets here were great, both Moretti and Hoffman, and I thought that the Mulu and Longas were green, essentially. I've kind of already gone over Mulu's charisma. I did think that they kind of used him as just a hot tag big man in this match, which he did a pretty good job of. There was an awesome wheelbarrow double team suplex finish down the stretch where the Nations took out Longas and picked up the win at 11 minutes, 26 seconds. 3 stars here. After that, we get to the second half of the show, and we saw the team of the Rogue Army, that's Bad Luck Fale and Jack Bonza, taking on the United Empire duo of Aaron Henare and Kyle Fletcher. So we're halfway through the show, and we finally get the first match of the night featuring actual New Japan stars. And the crowd was really into this, obviously, bigger stars, and getting to kind of see these two different warring factions compete against one another. All 4 guys looked decidedly a level above what we had seen on the rest of the show, just in their style of wrestling and movement. But the match itself was firmly in what I would consider house show territory. So it wasn't like they were out there really killing themselves or, putting on a clinic or anything like that. There was one period when they were on the outside, and it was pretty interesting. Bad Luck Fale had grabbed Kyle Fletcher and offered his chest up to a fan, and a fan gave him a chop. I think that's one of those things that you can only do in a safe, trusted, independent wrestling environment. If you do it in any other type of wrestling scenario, you open yourself up to lawsuits and things like that. So it is fun when they do that sort of stuff, but you have to be very careful. But fan chopped Kyle Fletcher. That was pretty memorable. I am curious about the whole Bullet Club, New Zealand Dojo, and Nations thing, because my understanding is that Bonza was like in the Nations, and Fale obviously is Bullet Club, but he's also the New Zealand Dojo head trainer, and it's sort of known. And then obviously Jack Bonza is like one of the, I think, owners of PWA Black Label. So there's a lot kind of mixed in there, and I'm wondering how they're going to be presented. Obviously they're the Rogue Army branch of Bullet Club, so basically Bullet Club's representation here on the Tamashii brand. But I am wondering how that melds in with PWA's kayfabe and then the kind of greater known New Zealand Dojo connection. It's just kind of a little bit weird. But Henare, who is a New Zealand Dojo and Fale trainee graduate, he did at one point slam Fale in this match, which was pretty impressive. They had a good closing stretch, but down the tail end, there was a low blow finish, which was a little bit disappointing here, just as the match was starting to kind of really pick up. And Jack Bonza gave a low blow to Kyle Fletcher at the 12-minute, 43-second mark, so the United Empire picks up the win here. Crowd was not happy with that finish. I still would go about 3 1/4 on the match overall. At the end, we saw jaw-jacking from Bonza and Henare post-match, talking about wanting to run it back, and I think that's going to play more into night 2, one of the only storylines that we see kind of carry over between these two nights. After that, we had the 6th match of the night, singles action. We had Libert Lucci, who was a recent inductee into the Rogue Army, so he's under Fale and Bonza, and he took on Andrew Villalobos of the New Zealand Dojo. This match started off pretty good. Lucci is just a really incredible chicken shit heel, because not only does he use the tactics that we've seen from lots of heels in the past, but he just adds this flair of comedy to it. And I don't know, I just find him really entertaining. Even if the match itself wasn't great, I think he is a good, really awesome character. Villalobos is a guy that I've been a little bit critical in the past. He headlined the first night of Tamashii against Kenta, and based on what we're seeing here from the previous tour, he's much, much improved. I think he has a lot more confidence and fluidity in his movement. There's still some greenery there, but he's definitely making strides. And this match was very much like a cat and mouse chase. Villalobos trying to get his hands on Lucci, and Lucci just trying to kind of avoid Villalobos. There was a period where things slowed down right in the middle of the match, and I'm kind of wondering if Villalobos maybe got blown up. Hard to tell, but after the comeback down the tail stretch, things did pick up and get a little bit better. There was a point where Villalobos had Lucci in a Boston Crab, and it looked like he was going to finish him. Lucci literally grabbed the ref and crawled over the referee to get to the rope break, which was pretty funny, but I don't know how you don't get disqualified for that. He used an eye rake escape into a cheating pinning combo at the 13-minute and 2-second mark for the win. I'd go 2 3/4 on this. So it was a little I wouldn't call it a good match, but it was fine. The co-main event here, we saw what was probably the match of the night, where we had the current reigning PWA heavyweight or world heavyweight championship. I don't know how they classify it, but Ricky South took on New Zealand dojo graduate Michael Richards in a very, very good match. This is the only match of the night that I would say, if you're just going to cherry pick, this is probably worth checking out. Ricky South, he's been holding that title for over 746 days. There's only been 4 defenses. I think partly there was a period where he was injured and was out and was unable to defend the title. And in that interim, they had crowned Mick Moretti as the interim champion. They ended up having a blow-off steel cage match to unify those titles. I believe the deal was Ricky South was a babyface before he got injured and returned and became a heel. And you combine that with the ongoings of COVID and restrictions, and that's probably the reason for the lack of major title defenses. But again, this is 2 really big, muscular, strong heavyweights, big boys, very, very physical, very, very enjoyable match. There was a lot of heat on Ricky South. This Sydney crowd was not in favor of him whatsoever. Both men looked really good here. Very, very hard hitting and intense match. They worked their asses off. Down the stretch, there was a period where Michael Richards landed what's called the FTK. I think that's like one of his finishers or quasi-finishers. He's been beating people with it. And Ricky South had enough presence of mind to roll out of the ring. There was a period where there's a big boot botch going down the tail stretch that was, unfortunate, but I did notice it. But the end of the match here, Ricky South fights back, hits a huge inside out lariat and a pile driver for the 1-2-3. I'd go 3.5. Match of the night, one of the better matches from the Tamashii brand, so highly recommended. And then that brings us to the main event, where we saw the Sniper of the Sky, Robbie Eagles, taking on AEW's current signed star, as well as representative of the factory, Aaron Solo. And Robbie Eagles picked up the win here, 14 minutes, 23 seconds with a Ron Miller special. Solo does have a connection to the Tamashii brand in the sense that he was a graduate and trainee under the New Zealand dojo with Bad Luck Fale. So they've kind of given him a space to work here and, some shine. And I also think it's good for him to kind of get some reps in. Plus, he adds a little bit of name value from his AEW exposure. Him and Eagles had a good match. I wouldn't call it a great match. The crowd was very into Robbie Eagles, and I sort of consider him the current de facto ace of the brand. He's sort of been at the forefront, the guy pushing, a lot of spearheading Australian wrestling internationally, just in general. If you're listening at this point, you're probably already aware that currently Robbie Eagles is a member of Team DK, but when this occurred in February, This was Factory versus Chaos. Like I said, the crowd was really into it. There was less high flying and action than I expected from these two guys. I sort of feel like everyone top to bottom, and I hate to be critical, but I just feel like they treated this slightly like a house show, and I feel like some of that kind of falls on the crowd, not necessarily giving them the most energy in the world. But the last 4 minutes of the match did turn out to be very, very good. Down the stretch, Eagles hits a 450 to the leg, went for the Ron Miller special, and he picks up the win, like I mentioned. There was a show-closing promo from Robbie Eagles, and the audience was a little bit weak, even though they were into him here, and I was kind of surprised. Robbie did mention wanting to bring Australia to Chaos, which is pretty funny because I don't think that's going to necessarily be the case moving forward. And then at the time, Yo was getting ready to wrestle Hiromu, and he said that after Yo and Hiromu win or wrestle, whoever wins, he wants the next title shot for the IWGP Junior Heavyweight title, and he wants to bring that title to Australia and have a match here. And he has his sights set to be included in the Oceania Cup, which is a big multi-day event that's coming up in Wagga Wagga for the Tamashii brand, and he plans to win that as well. So lots of fire from Robbie. That kind of does it for the night. There were comments after the show. They featured more of the backstage comments for night 3 than they did for night 4. A few of the things I noticed: Jessica Choi wants to wrestle for Stardom. The Velocities have aims to go into the NJPW Junior Tag Division, which I think they'd be a breath of fresh air to kind of enter there. There's a lot of talent there right now. Carter Dreams is a really good promo. One of the few guys that we've seen from PWA that I think stand out as a very good promo. Richard Mulu talked about how he had a really good line at the end of his promo where he talked about, Australia sort of taking over the wrestling world. And he's like, there's 2 things you can do about it: nothing and like it, which I liked that. I did find the Rogue Army to kind of be hilarious post-match. And there was also comedy on the United Empire side because Kyle Fletcher was trying to cut a promo, but because he got low blowed, he just kept grabbing his balls and he just couldn't get the words out to actually speak, which was pretty funny. Liber Lucci still has aims to buy his own farm, and he's a good promo. Even if his match wasn't great, he's a good promo, good character guy. And I thought most of the dojo guys had subpar promos. I think that's something that they probably need to work on. Ricky South had a good promo. And most of what was here, these guys and girls were given like probably around a minute to talk. So it's not like we got to see a lot of their chops, but everything they talked about was very spirity, talking about New Zealand and where they've come from and Australia and wanting to elevate the brand. So some good stuff there, but I'm still a little critical just in the sense that there wasn't a lot of, I liked that a few of these wrestlers talked about their goals and aspirations, whereas many of the other talents that were here didn't really give us too much insight into their character, into what their goals or aspirations were. There were no stories that were kind of carrying over. And so, again, I kind of feel like even though the show was good, it was sort of like a house show for Tamashii, and it wasn't something that, again, if you're a diehard New Japan fan and you're tuning in and you're watching the greater overall show, or even like say Strong as well, I don't know where this fits into the overall kayfabe, or if it does at all. I guess it's kind of more like a fun side quest, but it's really inconsequential to the overall kayfabe of what's going on abroad with New Japan. I did like the Eagles tie-ins, though, down the stretch where he starts kind of planting the seeds of his discontent with Chaos and everything like that. But yeah, that's going to do it for night 1 of Tamashii. Now let's jump into night 4 of Tamashii, the subsequent evening on February 4th, 2023. This aired on March 4th, 2023 on NJPWWorld.com. And this emanated from Melbourne, Australia, from an arena known as the Croxton. The attendance here, 352 in attendance. And this was a pretty good show and a very good crowd. A lot more life and energy for night 4 than there was on night 3. And this kind of emulates what we saw from the first Tamashii tour, where the second night was much more lively, and the production level was elevated. That's sort of what we saw here on this evening. Now, I did mention that there was multi-cameras on both evenings and that the production was similar and comparable in many ways. But I thought that this was, even though this was a smaller venue, it probably was a more attended show than the first night. They had a lot more lights and kind of high production in the actual arena, which was pretty cool. I did think that they, I don't know if this was a misstep or not, but they changed the commentary team from PWA's house commentating table to more recognizable names from New Japan, with Chris Charlton and Juicy Gino Gambino covering the show, which was in some ways kind of nice because that's a palatable duo that we're very familiar with if you have been watching New Japan for any length of time. And it's always nice to hear Gino since we haven't seen too much of him since the pandemic. But because this was recorded in post, it kind of clashed from a sound quality standpoint with the actual live venue. I sort of personally would have preferred the PWA team. Even though they're not as familiar to many of the audience that were probably tuning in, just internationally, it might have been better just from a quality standpoint to have the more natural sounding commentating booth, because when they try to mix in, what was essentially a non-commentated show and then add the commentary and post it, for whatever reason, there's always just this disconnect, and it kind of lets you know, like, these guys were not there. But other than that, I thought Chris Charlton and Gino Gambino did a very good job, and especially for Chris, who typically doesn't do, he's not like the lead he's not the lead guy on the commentating booth, and he did a good job here kind of filling into that Kevin Kelly role. So, the second night, I did like this better than the first night. Again, the attendance was better. What was a little bit different was, even though there was 8 matches like the previous show, the top 2 matches of the evening were both given a lot of time. They both went over the 15-minute mark. I think that's the first time in the history of Tamashii where any matches have gone for that sort of length. So that was a kind of a different look. And because of that, some of the matches on the undercard went for shorter periods of time. Also, there was conversely 3 matches featuring domestic stars on this evening as opposed to the 2 matches from the night prior. Same camera work as the first night, but I think the arena was just more conducive to, plus the crowd being better, was just more conducive to a better overall product presentation. I do think one thing that's interesting here, for the first 2 Tamashii shows, there wasn't a lot, but there was some coverage online, whether it be fans on, like, say, Reddit or on Cage Match or various different outlets. There were some individuals that watched those shows and actually had coverage. But when it comes to night 3 and night 4, virtually no coverage of any sort anywhere on the internet. So there was no way I could, like, go find reviews or see what people's impressions were. And there were a couple just small offhanded comments on Cage Match. And one thing I did see was there seemed to be the perception that this show was much better and worthwhile than the first show on this tour, which I kind of do tend to agree with that. But I will say this. I thought the undercard was not as good as the general quality of matches on the first show. But because there was an ebb and flow of different match times, it didn't feel like everyone was just getting the same match length. It was less strenuous to watch this show than it was the first one, even if the matches themselves weren't quite as good. And then you combine that with the top 2 matches being very good, including one match that is a notebook match that you need to go out of your way and check out. I think that kind of puts this show over the top. So for me, this is right on par in some ways with the Tamashii Night 2 in terms of, like, worthwhile shows to check out. And even if you're just cherry picking the top 2 matches, which they went ahead and labeled as a double main event, and I think that was probably an apt description for this. very, very good. So overall, night 2 is definitely superior to night 1, even if there were some better things offered on the first night. So let's start off. The show starts opening match. We have tag team action as the team from the New Zealand dojo, Nikolai Anton Bell and Shep Alexander, they took on a team of Australian independent wrestlers that I was not familiar with. The two wrestlers in question, Jake Anderwartha, and then a masked man who just goes by the name of Gore. And this team won their match, the veterans, at 9 minutes and 33 seconds. I believe they actually do have a official tag team name, which I wasn't privy to. But yeah, so dojos versus freelancers. And I do think that this guy, or from what I saw, the first individual, Jake Andwartha, he's a larger gentleman and maybe not in the best shape, but they talked about his legit experience and length of time wrestling, and he was deceptively agile and athletic for a guy his size, and I thought that he was pretty good. But the other, his tag team partner, Gore, this guy with the mask, he is a physical specimen. Some people might even just say a genetic freak. He is someone that I would definitely like to see a lot more of on the Tamashii brand, if not elsewhere. I think he's got upside. And speaking of the New Zealand dojo wrestlers, Anton Bell, this is the 4th time we've seen him on Tamashii. And, you know, he's not necessarily a physical marvel just yet, but I definitely think that he has something. Kind of reminds me of young, and I don't want to say he's as good as him, but he kind of reminds me of young Barry Windham when he was still kind of gangly before he filled out. That's kind of similar vibe I get from Anton Bell. He's technically pretty good. This match essentially, though, was a squash match where the experienced vets pretty much killed the New Zealand dojo guys. And at 9 minutes and 33 seconds, I thought it was a little bit long for just an extended squash. There wasn't a lot that was given to the New Zealand dojo guys. One thing that I didn't think was great, Anton Bell down the stretch put on a pretty sloppy Boston Crab, but he did have a good drop kick in the match. His Boston Crab, though, he was like falling forward, which I don't know if maybe he was tired or if he was hurt, what happened there. Maybe there wasn't good cooperation, but that stood out. At the tail end, though, Shep Alexander was the guy that took the loss here, and there was an incredible double team move where Nikolai Anton Bell, I'm sorry, Shep Alexander got power bombed, and then they then the other guy from the experienced team took Nikolai Anton Bell and dominated him onto Shep Alexander's prone body. So this was just very similar in style to like a Road Warriors type or like demolition type squash match. So 9 minutes, 33 seconds. The vets pick up the win here. Pretty cool finish. And I got to tell you, I want to see more of Gore. I would go about 2.5 on this one. Second match of the night, we had singles action as Richard Mulu returned, and he took on a gentleman by the name of Jarvis. And we already know Richard Mulu's from the New Zealand dojo. Jarvis was a young talent, and he was a late replacement for another individual. They said his name several times, but I could not make out his name to really, the funny thing is, like, the commentators on the first night were both Australian, I believe, and I can understand what they're saying from inferring, but when they're talking of, when they're saying names that I'm not familiar with, including their own, really hard for me to make those out, especially on the audio, which wasn't necessarily the best. And then on night 2, you have Chris Charlton and Gino Gambino, who I am very familiar with understanding them, but they both also, one has an English accent, one has an Australian accent, and then, as I mentioned earlier, the sound quality wasn't great, so I could not understand who this individual was that Jarvis was a late replacement for, but he kind of had a smarmy, sort of smaller heel, arrogant sort of thing going on, and they put him in there with the big powerhouse babyface and Richard Mulu, so there was definitely that sort of David versus Goliath, but the David is a smarmy heel. And in the early goings, he couldn't really handle the power of Richard Mulu, but he just kept, playing to the crowd. Eventually, Jarvis targeted the left leg of Richard Mulu to kind of neutralize it. The crowd was really into this match. I think they did a good job sort of capturing the attention of the crowd. And there was some cool offense down the tail stretch from Jarvis. He's a guy I think that might have some upside. But at the end here, he tried to go for a top rope crossbody. Mulu caught that into a huge power slam for the 1, 2, 3 at 7 minutes, 20 seconds. I'd go about 2 3/4 on this one. Third match of the night, we had the team of the Rogue Army. That's Bad Luck Fale and Jack Bonza of the Bullet Club. They took on the New Zealand Dojo tag team of Michael Richards and Andrew Villalobos. Again, that sort of weird dichotomy coming into play because, at the top of the Rogue Army is Fale, but he's also the head trainer for the New Zealand Dojo. So he's sort of like a teacher versus a student sort of thing going on with him and the New Zealand graduate tag team here. But before the match actually started, there was a pre-match promo. Jack Bonza got on the mic, and he kind of buried Melbourne and all the talent from there. And he said that, the Rogue Army is in scouting mode. They're recruiting, but there's literally no talent from Melbourne that they would ever consider, and just kind of buried the entire state, which was pretty hilarious. The crowd got a lot of heat reaction from that. Again, I thought Villalobos looked improved and good here. This is the second match on the tour we saw him in, and seeing him in a tag situation. And he got good fire, but he still looked green, and I thought he looked more green in this match than he did in the singles match the night prior. This match followed very much a classic tag team formula. You know what I'm talking about. The early goings into the shine, and then the cutoff, and then the heat, the comeback, and then the close. That's exactly what they did here. The only thing, though, is because it's a Bullet Club match and it's, veteran heel guys who are on top of their respective faction, the heat segment and the cutoff was very, very prolonged. And lots and lots of cheating, lots of brawling on the outside. Very, very little from the babyface team. Even when they did come back, they just didn't get much. And down the stretch, we saw a definitive STF win as Jack Bonza applied the STF to Andrew Villalobos for the tap out at 11 minutes and 22 seconds. And I thought this was pretty slow. I'd go 2.5 on it. I was not loving this match. The fourth match of the night, more tag team action. We saw the New Zealand team of Jake Taylor and Jordan Allen Wright taking on the tag team known as the Natural Classics. That's Tome Philippe and Stevie Philippe. And this was a team that I thought had the standout match of the evening on the first night of Tamashii on the previous tour. The Natural Classics, that is. And so again, and if you notice, I just keep repeating, we're seeing dojo guys taking on veterans, which makes me do kind of call into question, what are the aims of these shows exactly? Are we looking to build to the future? Is this to give, reps to these green guys, or is it more to be a showcase for the Australian talent that is already sort of established on an independent level, like the Natural Classics? Kind of calling some of that into question. I do think it's good that they're giving these New Zealand dojo guys experience, but I am wondering if there's a better way to lay this out, because we're seeing so many matches where it's dojo guys versus veterans. And part of me is wondering if that's because that's better for the dojo guys than to put them in matches against one another on the lower stage of the card, as would be more traditional per, like, say, the Japanese style booking for a regular show. The match itself was okay. One thing I thought was weird was they kept having very, very long, prolonged wide shots. And I mentioned that this show was a multi-cam show, and for whatever reason on this match in particular, they had a lot of just steady cam wide angle wide shots, which I thought was kind of strange. The pace of the match was pretty measured early on. Alan Wright, as I mentioned, who I've been pretty impressed with in the past, was very taped up, and Kayfabe injured. I'm wondering if maybe potentially actually injured or if there was something going on because he didn't do a lot in the match itself. And this was another basic babyface versus heel tag team structure. You can pretty much copy and paste what I said about the previous match into this one. A lot of these matches were feeling very, very house show style. There was a period, though, where there was a Jake Taylor did a double suplex on the Philippe's, which was pretty impressive and very cool. Not the best outing from everybody involved. There were some botches, some mistimed cues and things like that, but at the very, very tail end, we saw Tomé Philippe get an air raid crash on Jordan Allen Wright for the 1-2-3 victory. 13 minutes, 9 seconds. I'd go 2 1/4, so I was pretty low on this one. That brings us to the fifth match of the night, singles action. We saw Liberd Lucci taking on Mitch Waterman, and Waterman is a veteran here in Australia. He's a former MCW champion. That's Melbourne City Wrestling. So, that's and Gino Gambino was keen to point out that he himself is also a Melbourne City Wrestling World Heavyweight Champion, which is pretty funny. Mitch Waterman did pick up the victory here over Liberd Lucci at 10 minutes and 57 seconds, but it was not without controversy. At the beginning of the match, they did a crowd battle to start, each guy going to the top rope, trying to garner crowd support. Lucci was very much a heel and reviled from the crowd, and pretty comical and funny here. This match was the first, what I would call like true pro level work style match of this show, because everything up to this point was, young dojo guys against experienced vets. But this match, even though it did feel a level above what we'd seen in the first 4 matches, it still had a lot. It felt very much like just a house show, shticky sort of match. I've been to a lot of, like, say, NXT. Some people we call it the Largo Loop, but others call it the Coconut Loop style house shows, where you're sort of having your NXT guys get reps and gain more experience. And I swear to God, I've seen this exact style match laid out and worked many, many times, especially with, like, say, Mansoor. So very, very house show shticky. But it did pick up intermittently throughout the match, especially during the second half. There was a period where Lucci was almost pinned. He got his foot on the rope and then he rolled outside. So I think Waterman had hit him with some sort of major move. And while he's on the outside, Waterman is trying to get him back in. And while he's hanging over the second rope trying to pull Lucci in, he didn't realize that Lucci had grabbed a chair from the outside. He used that chair to reach up and smash Waterman in the head with it. The ref saw it, gets the disqualified at 10 minutes, 57 seconds. Starts to have a bit of a post-match attack, but pretty much just throws a tantrum and saunters off. So that kind of concluded that match. I would go probably 2 1/4 stars. So if you're noticing, as I mentioned earlier, the undercard to me was not as quality as most of the offerings during the first show, but because there was a different ebb and flow to the show and the crowd was really into it, it was still an easier watch than the first night. But things really picked up in the last 3 matches of the evening, which kind of saved what I would consider sort of a middling show up to this point. First big singles match of the evening, we saw Aaron Solo, fresh off his loss from the previous evening to Robbie Eagles, and he's taking on a well-known veteran of Australian wrestling, Slex, otherwise known as Slex the Business. Was a member of Team DK, maybe still is. I'm not totally sure what that affiliation is currently, but these guys had a good match. Slex is a guy that is known all over Australia, as I mentioned, but he's also wrestled in the UK, wrestled in the States. He had a big match a few years ago in Melbourne City Wrestling with Kazuchika Okada, when Okada was having like an excursion match, I think in like 2017, 2018. And he also had just signed with Ring of Honor before the pandemic started. And then, kind of just had a short-lived stint there because the pandemic happened and then all the fallout with Sinclair and then, them getting purchased by Tony Khan took place. So suffice it to say, he's not currently with Ring of Honor, but one of the more well-known talents on this show. And match was good. Solo had a lot of sort of like, heel shtick in this match. There was one point where there was like a monkey flip botch and Solo landed right on his head. Was pretty scary, but I thought these guys had pretty good chemistry, were working well with one another. This was, as I mentioned, the match prior was like the first true pro level match of the night. Well, these two guys were like a much more a level above that. We'd see this for the rest of the evening. And I wanted to kind of see more from Solo on this show. In fact, on all these Tamashii shows, I sort of feel like he's a guy that has a reputation as being underrated and underutilized. And then on shows like this where they're giving him key spotlights, he's going out there and he's putting in good performances. But I want to see him kind of showcase more of what he has to offer and sort of, I don't think there's any reason that he shouldn't be aiming. I'm not sure if he would necessarily hit this target, but for him, a guy like him, I feel like he should be aiming to be the talk of the Tamashii shows and being like the breakout, standout guy, like the one who's really putting in these incredible, matches and efforts. And I haven't seen that from him here. I do think, though, that Suplex is an underrated talent and a guy that hasn't really gotten his just due. Maybe it's just timing, whatever, but he was fantastic here. Had a really, really awesome move where he had a torture rack on Aaron Solo and then spun him around into a Blue Thunder Bomb for a near fall. That was really, really cool. Down the stretch, though, Aaron Solo hit a sling. Suplex came off the ropes from like a slingshot. Aaron Solo hit him with the super kick as a reversal, went to the top rope, double foot stomps onto Suplex, and then hit him with the pedigree for the 1, 2, 3. Both Chris Charlton and Gino Gambino were pretty surprised by this outcome. I have to say I was as well. So this was somewhat a quasi upset. And I kind of have to wonder if either Tamashii is sort of pushing Solo because they've got to deal with him, and obviously like it has something it might potentially have something to do with the fact that he's a Fale guy, or if this has something to do with like Tony Khan privilege because he's from AEW, that sort of thing. And he already did a job the night prior to Robbie Eagles. Hard to say, but they put him in a tough situation here. I thought Suplex looked very good. I thought Aaron Solo was good as well. I'd go 3 1/4 on this one, and I was kind of surprised at the outcome. I sort of expected Suplex to win, but I don't think he was hurt in this loss by any means. And he's a guy that I'd like to see a lot more from in the future because he's got an incredible look. He's got great aura and just, he's a guy that I think could be a star somewhere for sure. That brings us to the final two matches of the evening, what they dubbed the double main event. And a lot of people coming out of this show, there was the one buzz that was sort of out there on the internet was that there was this incredible match between Robbie Eagles and Kyle Fletcher. And after checking this match out, I have to tell you that the buzz was not unfounded whatsoever. This match was phenomenal. Now, I did see people saying like match of the year worthy. I wouldn't go that far personally, but in my estimation, this is the final match of Chaos's iteration of Robbie Eagles and was, very noteworthy from that standpoint. Also, there was a lot kind of going into this match because Kyle Fletcher was trained by Robbie Eagles, and both men have sort of made it to this world stage in New Japan at this point, but kind of taken diverging paths. So there's sort of a teacher-student there theme going on there. Plus, obviously Eagles being a smaller man in comparison to Kyle Fletcher, this is sort of like a never open weight style match. But these last two matches were a whole different level of anything else we've seen on Tamashii. And, again, United Empire versus Chaos. And Fletcher really did a great job in the early goings, kind of controlling Robbie Eagles with his size and then his rough housing tactics and brawling on the outside, which kind of ripened Robbie up for some of the big power offense, the big man offense, as we like to call it, from Kyle Fletcher later on in the match. Robbie had to utilize a lot of his speed and technical ability and his high flying, some of the lucha libre stylings that he's apt and known for. The match was awesome. There was one point though where there was an awesome roll through sequence, which resulted in Kyle Fletcher hitting a huge Liger bomb for a near fall on Robbie Eagles. Lots of big power moves from Kyle. Probably around the halfway point of the match, and this match went for a while. Robbie started attacking the legs to kind of neutralize Kyle Fletcher, bring him down to his size, and started implementing huge kicks and big dives to kind of even up the score. There was a big sequence with both guys doing a lot of like huge moves, and it resulted finally in Kyle Fletcher hitting a Snapdragon suplex on Robbie Eagles, big double down, huge "This is awesome" chant. After that, these guys started a fight to the top rope, and at the 15-minute mark, Kyle Fletcher got the upper hand and hit a top rope Michinoku driver on Robbie Eagles. He almost won the match at this point. Robbie got a rope break, and then there was a swinging Michinoku bomb and kick out from Fletcher. Hit Eagles with that. So Fletcher was really kind of giving a lot to Robbie Eagles in this match. The crowd was super hot. This was probably the most into any match of the evening that I heard from anyone on the evening. Then there was a reversal into a Ron Miller special, sort of out of nowhere. Kyle Fletcher gets the ropes for a rope break. This led them into a huge striking exchange, back and forth. Huge lariat at the 20-minute mark. Both guys are down. Awesome. There was another "This is awesome" chant, and we started to go into the close in the last 4 minutes, and these guys were hitting all sorts of huge moves. Robbie Eagles got an incredible Poison Rana reversal and turbo backpack into a Ron Miller special for a very believable near fall. Eventually Kyle gets to the rope break. Robbie went to the top rope and targeted the leg. He tried to land that 450 onto the leg, which is his very well-known setup for the Ron Miller special. He missed, and then from there, Kyle Fletcher was able to hit the Grimstone Tombstone counter for a near fall. Robbie kicked out. The crowd is super, super hot. They got the third "This is awesome" chant of the evening, and this match was starting to get into like the emotional territory. At that point, it seemed like Robbie was pretty much done. He hit one big defiant slap to the face of Kyle Fletcher. Kyle just laid him out with a knee and then elevated him for another Grimstone pile driver for the 1, 2, 3. And then at the very end, Robbie was just completely wiped. We did see Kyle Fletcher offer a United Empire headband, and this is one of the big talking points and news stories coming out of this show. Robbie seemed a little perplexed, but these guys didn't have anything else after that. This style of match is the kind that you maybe sort of expect the guys to hug or shake hands or have a show of respect, and there wasn't much of that. It was sort of just like Kyle handed him the armband, and Robbie just kind of sauntered off, and he was very dejected, very, very angry. And earlier on the evening, it was worth noting that Chris Charlton made mention on commentary how the winner of Yo and Hiromu had already been kind of decided, and at this point, Eagles was looking overlooked because they had already announced that the next challenger for the title was going to be Lio Rush. So two stablemates from Chaos kind of got a crack at Hiromu prior to Robbie getting that next challenge. And I do know that we had even had a Twitter interaction with Robbie Eagles back in, I believe, like February or January, where he'd made his intentions to be the next challenger for Hiromu's title known even then. So kind of good storytelling here. This match did get a standing ovation, even if Robbie sort of just left after being dejected and broken. And that match, I'd go 4 1/4 plus. I think it was just a smidge below what I would consider, say, like a 4.5-star match. But if you were higher on it, I wouldn't be surprised. This is one where I'd say it's not just recommended viewing, but it's required viewing. You need to see this match. Easily the best match in the 4-show offering of the Tamashii brand. And, easy watch. The 24 minutes just flew by. And that brings us to, finally, our main event of the evening, as we saw United Empire member Aaron Henare take on big man Caveman Ugg. And Caveman Ugg is a very, very well-known, integral star in the landscape of Australian professional wrestling. I'm not too familiar with him, but even I know the name. And these two men, big boys, super heavyweights, big-time brawl. And the crowd was really, really, really behind Caveman Ugg here. Aaron Henare did make a point to come down featuring the indigenous people's flag of his people there from, I believe, New Zealand, which was pretty cool. But this match was very, very, very hard-hitting, very stiff. Henare, his striking just rules. Huge chops all over the ring and then all over the outside as well. And then at one point, these guys went into the front row, into the crowd. They started brawling into the crowd with huge chops. And then, I don't know if this was a plant or what the deal was, but at one point, Caveman Ugg turned around and gave a forearm to one of the fans. And they just sort of ate it, which was kind of hilarious. And then a few moments later, Aaron Henare turned around to the security guards, which were trying to get them back into the ring. And he fed him a forearm as well. So this really had sort of like a wild, brawling sort of feel to it. Very, very different from what we saw in the previous match. Later on after that, they were just kind of breaking guardrails over each other. I kind of felt bad for some of the people in the front row. They're probably having the time of their life, but the guardrails just kept getting sort of like landed on crowd and audience members, which was kind of crazy and kind of wild. There was a point, though, where before they got into the ring, they spent so much time on the outside. I just had to remark, like, how is this not a count out? Like, at what point does the referee not reach the 20 count? They've been out there for many, many, many minutes. And then at one point, Caveman Ugg, who is a really, really large man and someone that Gino said had deceptive agility, he did a standing stomp onto Aaron Henare. So he jumped up in the air and stomped him on his chest down to the mat, which was pretty incredible. If you're not sure what I'm describing, imagine, like, say, Seth Rollins' curb stomp, but he's landing on a man's chest while he's standing. It was really cool. From there, we go into a huge strike exchange between the two guys. You know what I'm talking about. Forearm for forearm. They're eating it. We're at the 10-minute mark of the match. Highly enjoyable. These guys are just brawling and kicking the shit out of each other. And then at one point, we get a huge spinning kick from Henare, which elicited an incredible sell from Caveman Ugg. After that, Caveman Ugg hit this incredible, the only thing I could call it is a stalling, swinging Uranage, where he like had Henare up and he swung him back and forth and then finally lifted him up in the air and hit him with the rock bottom. Something I have not seen in the past. It was really, really cool. Got the 1-2. Henare kicks out. We're at the 15-minute mark, and Henare starts landing multiple headbutts. He's got Caveman Ugg in trouble. Hits him with a Berserker Bomb, and it looks like he's about to win. And then out of nowhere, Bad Luck Fale shows up on the stage, distracts the ref. Jack Bonza grabs the leg of Aaron Henare, who was in the corner. Libert Lucci runs in. He's distracting the referee, and Bonza hits a low blow to Henare. At that point, Caveman Ugg hits what's known as the Ugg driver for the win, 1, 2, 3, and then he accepts the invitation from the Rogue Army to join their ranks. And then that was the show closing angle. Aaron Henare being laid out in the middle of the ring, and then Jack Bonza, Caveman Ugg, Libert Lucci, and Fale standing on the stage, arm in arm. The Rogue Army is here in Tamashii. At the end of the show, we did get a few comments. Not as many as I mentioned earlier from the first night. They kind of just focused on the major matches of the evening. But the stuff from Liber Lucci and Mitch Waterman was kind of meh. There wasn't anything there that to really sink my teeth into. But from Eagles, he did mention backstage how proud he was of Kyle. He wants a rematch at some point, and was kind of unsure of his invitation to the United Empire, but he kind of needed to recollect himself and figure out what the next steps were for Robbie, which makes sense because now we know he's in TMDK. Likewise, Kyle gave a really impassioned promo backstage about Tamashii and how incredible it was that, this is not something he could have dreamed of in the past, and now it's finally happening. And then he set his aims with Mark Davis on the IWGP Tag Team titles. They want Bishamon, which is obviously coming to fruition here at Sakura Genesis. Hanare had a lot of pretty cross words for Fale and the rest of the Rogue Army, and he wants the United Empire to come and show their dominance in Tamashii. And then to close out the backstage comments to the Rogue Army, which was pretty funny, Fale and Bonza, they mocked Hanare and the United Empire. They called Ugg a sexy beast. Bonza had a hilarious comment where at one point, like, Caveman Ugg started to speak. He's like, wait, you can speak English? Like, so I don't really know if that's part of the gimmick. Like, he couldn't speak before, but that was pretty funny. And that's it. That closes out the show. I would say definitely, at the very least, check out the top 2 matches of the night. The rest of the show was meh, but the Aaron Solo and Slex match at 12 minutes probably worth checking out as well. I'm still a little bit unsure of this experiment because there's elements of this being like a developmental as well as like an expansion for New Japan, but also kind of more so like just a big time indie showcase. Like, it doesn't feel that different from other independent companies, whether that be in the UK or the United States. And it doesn't have that authentic New Japan branding that, say, like New Japan Strong did at various iterations. I am looking forward to what this brand has to offer for this upcoming Oceania Cup. I don't know what the proper name is, but they brought it up a lot on commentary, and many of the different wrestlers also indicated their interest in competing for the Oceania Cup. So that's definitely something that I think is going to be probably pretty cool, and something that they're saying it's going to be like a 3-day event. I believe that might change, but if it's going to be this huge tournament that everyone's involved in and, sort of has this prestige to it. I love tournaments, so that's something I can definitely get behind, but I still want to figure out what this brand is supposed to be. Like, I know that it's something that the talent are very passionate about. You definitely can gather that from the backstage comments, and they believe in this, and they want to show the world what Australia and New Zealand have to offer to the greater world of professional wrestling. But at the same time, I have to be honest about what I'm seeing on these shows, and there's a lot of green talent, especially coming out of the New Zealand dojo, that haven't quite figured out their craft yet. They're making strides, they're improving, but one has to wonder if this show is the best place to have that many dojo talents all at one time. Usually if you're watching, say, like New Japan Strong or even just New Japan proper, you might see 2 matches max, maybe 3 max, but typically 1 or 2 featuring the Lions with a wide array of veterans and big names down the rest of the card. But on these shows, you're getting them in at least 5 or 4 or 5, sometimes 6 of the matches of the evening, and it's feeling more like a house show than it is like a premier wrestling brand. The only show that Tamashii's done so far that kind of a shoot away from that was Tamashii Night 2 last year, which felt more like a super indie. None of this really at this point 100% ties into or represents New Japan as a whole, and I feel like for them to gain more of a foothold and the interest of fans internationally, they need to kind of re-examine the way they're booking this, the way they're laying it out, and figure out what the goals are. Maybe they're happy with it at this point. I don't know, but I know for me, as just I can only speak for me. I'm not from Australia. I'm not familiar with the Aussie wrestling scene. I'm just a guy that hosts a podcast where we break down New Japan. We've been doing it for 5 or 6 years. I feel like I'm their target audience. I'm somebody who watches almost everything that the company has to offer. And when I'm watching this, I don't feel like I'm watching New Japan. And I do feel like it's okay that it's not 100% representative. I don't expect it to be a Cork and Hall show, obviously. But I do think there needs to be more emphasis on the New Japan way of doing things, whether it be just presentation or, even just the talents that they're bringing over. I think that they had some great talent from New Japan on this tour, but there's other guys that could have been involved as well. I know that they're bringing over Shingo and a few others for the next tour, which is going to be cool. And the other thing too is they have to get this stuff out sooner. It's not enough to put it out a month after the fact. A month after the fact is way too long. Most people are not going to watch it. It took me a month to watch it after the month that it had already been out. So I'm watching it on a 2-month delay before I'm putting out this review to the world. And I feel like I'm sure that some of the other shows that are out there are covering it, but we're probably one of the only shows that are like devoting actual, consistent time like this to covering this brand. And I hope and pray to continue to do it. And if the brand does well, hopefully it'll make its way to our coverage of it, to Keeping It Strong Style proper week in and week out. But at this point, I think there's still a lot more questions than answers as it pertains to this brand. But I'll just leave you with this. If you haven't checked anything out, be sure to check out Eagles and Fletcher. And I do think it's going to be interesting to see what happens moving forward with the Rogue Army, with Bullet Club, especially considering the exodus of Jay White and the ongoing turmoil within Bullet Club current day between David Finlay and ELP, and how that's going to pertain to say the Rogue Army. So this was highly enjoyable. I was glad I got a chance to do this, and hopefully you enjoy listening to it. Give us your feedback. What did you think? How did you feel the show went? And either way, check us out. This coming week, we're going to be having our preview of Sakura Genesis, as well as reviewing the Road to Sakura Genesis. So this has all been a mouthful. Make sure to connect with us on social media. On Twitter, we're at KI Strong Style. On Facebook, we run the Wrestling Squared Circle. On Instagram and at Reddit, Jeremy is the Pro Black Guy, and I am Keeping It Strong Style on Reddit. You can email Jeremy at socialsuplex.com. Be sure to check out all our other shows on the Social Suplex Podcast Network. One Nation Radio, hosted by Rich Ladd and James Boyd. Grave Consequences with Caleb and Maserati. All Things Elite with Floyd and Austin. AEW Match Guide Podcast, hosted by Sir Sam. And The Great Match Generator, hosted by Danny Kugler. Don't forget to subscribe and leave a rating review, and we'll catch you next week on Keeping It Strong Style, the ace of podcasts. Ichiban.
Thank you for listening to Keepin' It Strong Style. We'll see you next time.